Paramount sent a memo to the Godfather set. 3 sentences. Brando doesn't know his lines. Either fire him or shut down production. Coppola did either. It was March 1971. Day 23 of shooting. The production was already over budget and behind schedule. Francis Ford Coppola was 31 years old, directing his first major studio film, and fighting for survival on every front. Paramount wanted him gone. The crew doubted him. And now his biggest star, the man he fought the studio for months to cast, was refusing to memorize the script. Marlon Brando sat in Don Corleone's chair in the dimly lit office set. Costume perfect. Makeup perfect. The cotton stuffed in his cheeks to create that bulldog jaw. But when the script supervisor approached with her binder open, ready to run lines before the take, Brando waved her away. "I'll know it when we shoot," he said. She glanced at Coppola, who was standing behind the camera with cinematographer Gordon Willis. Coppola's face showed nothing. He'd learned not to react visibly to anything Brando did. The crew was watching. The studio spies were watching. Any sign of panic would travel back to Hollywood by sunset. The assistant director called for final positions. 80 people moved into place, grips adjusting the last of the practical lamps, sound mixing the boom levels, actors taking their marks. The scene was crucial. Don Corleone meeting with Sollozzo and the Turk, the conversation that would set the entire plot in motion. 7 pages of dense dialogue. Brando had the most lines. Gordon Willis leaned toward Coppola. "Did he learn it?" "We're about to find out." On day 34, a memo arrived from the studio head. It was 1 sentence. "Fix Brando or we fix you." Francis had known this was coming since before production started. When he told Paramount he wanted Marlon Brando for Don Corleone, the studio executives had laughed in his face. Brando was box office poison in 1971, a decade of disasters, a reputation for being difficult, impossible to insure. They'd given Francis a list of acceptable actors: Laurence Olivier, Ernest Borgnine, even Danny Thomas. Francis had tested Brando anyway. Shot it himself, in Brando's living room, with a handheld camera. Brando had improvised the whole thing. Slicking his hair back with shoe polish, stuffing Kleenex in his mouth, creating the character on the spot. When Francis showed the test to the executives, they'd gone quiet. Then they'd agreed, but with conditions. Brando would work for scale, $50,000 instead of his usual $1 million. He'd post a bond for any production delays he caused. And if he screwed up, Francis would take the fall. Now, 23 days into shooting, the screw-up was happening in slow motion. It had started small. Day 3, Brando asked for his lines to be written on cue cards and held just off camera. Not unusual, lots of actors use them as a safety net. But by day 8, Brando wasn't just glancing at the cards. He was reading them. Full sentences. His eyes clearly tracking left to right mid-take. By day 15, he'd stopped pretending to have memorized anything. He'd show up to set, sit in the chair, and wait for his dialogue to be fed to him line by line. The other actors were furious. Al Pacino, who'd been cast as Michael against the studio's wishes just like Brando, watched the legend he'd idolized become the laziest person on set. James Caan would finish a take and mutter loud enough for the crew to hear. "Must be nice to get paid to read." The crew started taking bets on how long Francis would last before the studio replaced him. The over-under was day 30. Subscribe and leave a comment, because what Coppola did next changed how movies are made. Day 26. The family dinner scene. Long table, multiple actors, overlapping dialogue. Brando was supposed to deliver a speech about family and loyalty, the emotional core of the entire film. Francis called action. Brando stared at the cue card holder. Nothing came out. Cut! Francis walked onto the set. "Marlon, we need that line." "Which line?" "The one about." Francis stopped himself. The entire crew was watching. He lowered his voice. "Can we talk in your trailer?" They walked off set together. The crew went to lunch early. The whispers started immediately. In the trailer, Francis didn't sit down. "They want me to fire you." Brando looked up from the couch, genuinely surprised. "Who does?" "Paramount. They think you're sabotaging the film." "I'm not sabotaging anything. I'm giving you the performance. You're not giving me the lines. The lines are secondary." Brando stood up, his full height suddenly filling the small space. "You want me to sound like I memorized the script? Like I'm reciting? Or do you want me to sound like I'm thinking these thoughts for the first time?" Francis stared at him. It was the most Brando had said about his process since shooting began. "The cue cards," Brando continued, "they're not a crutch. They're a tool. I read the line, I process it, I respond as Vito. Not as Marlon who memorized words last night. As Vito, hearing it now. The studio doesn't care about your method. They care that you look like you're reading." "Then don't shoot my eyes." Francis walked back to set. He pulled Gordon Willis aside. "Can we light him so his eyes stay in shadow?" Gordon, who'd been fighting with the studio about how dark he was shooting the film anyway, smiled for the first time in weeks. "I can light him so you can barely see his face." Francis called a production meeting that night. No studio observers allowed, just his core team. He told them the new plan. They would lean into Brando's limitations and make them the film's signature style. The cue cards would stay, but they'd be repositioned, placed where Brando's eyeline would look natural. Gordon would light every Brando scene with practical lamps and shadows, keeping his eyes dark, mysterious. And Francis would shoot Brando in profile, in shadow, from behind, anything that made reading invisible and added to the character's danger. "We're not making Brando look like he knows his lines," Francis told them. "We're making Vito Corleone look like he's thinking." The next morning, Francis blocked the family dinner scene completely differently. Instead of the traditional coverage, master shot then close-ups, he shot Brando almost entirely in wide shots and over-the-shoulder angles. When they did go close, Gordon kept a practical lamp between the camera and Brando's face, throwing half of it into shadow. Brando read every line off cards. And it looked perfect. What the crew didn't know was that Brando had stopped sleeping. The performance had nothing to do with laziness. It came out later, years after the film's release, in interviews Brando gave when he was finally willing to talk about the process. He hadn't been refusing to learn lines out of ego or disrespect. He'd been deliberately keeping himself in a state of spontaneous response. Brando had always worked this way, but The Godfather required something extra. Vito Corleone wasn't a character who expressed emotion openly. He was a man who thought before he spoke, who ate every word, who treated language as power. If Brando memorized the lines, he'd deliver them with the polish of performance. If he read them fresh each take, he'd deliver them with the hesitation of thought. It was brilliant. It was also destroying him. By day 40, Brando was barely eating. His eyes had dark circles the makeup department couldn't fully hide. Between takes, he'd sit in the chair and stare at nothing, staying inside Vito's headspace for hours. The cotton in his cheeks made it hard to breathe. The psychological weight of never leaving character was cracking something inside him. Francis saw it. Started shooting Brando's scenes earlier in the day when he had more energy. Gave him longer breaks. Cut the shot list down to only essential angles. The studio complained about the slow pace. Francis told them Brando was giving the performance of a lifetime, and they'd understand when they saw the footage. They didn't believe him until dailies. Robert Evans, Paramount's head of production, flew to New York to watch the dailies personally. He'd been one of the executives most opposed to Brando's casting. He sat in the screening room expecting to see the disaster the set reports had described, an actor reading off cards, lifeless and detached. Instead, he saw Vito Corleone. Not Marlon Brando playing a character. Vito. Thinking. Calculating. Every pause loaded with meaning. Every word delivered with the weight of a man who understood that language was violence. Evans called the set that night. Told Francis to ignore every memo Paramount had sent. Shoot Brando however he needed to. Take as much time as necessary. The studio would handle it. Francis hung up and walked onto the soundstage where they were prepping the next day's scenes. The crew was exhausted, doubt written all over their faces. He gathered them together. "We're good," he said simply. "Studio's off our backs. Brando stays." The relief was visible. Even James Caan, who'd been the most vocal critic of Brando's method, nodded slowly. They'd all seen the dailies too. They knew what they had. On day 67, Brando shot his final scene. He left the set without saying goodbye to anyone except Coppola. The garden scene. Don Corleone playing with his grandson, moments before his death. Francis had written it specifically for Brando's strengths: minimal dialogue, maximum presence. Brando improvised most of it. The bit with the orange peel in his mouth, making monster faces at the kid. The way he collapsed so gently, like a man who'd been expecting death and welcomed it as an old friend. One take. Francis called cut. Brando stood up, brushed the dirt off his costume, and walked off set. He found Francis by the monitors. "That's it for me?" "That's it." Brando nodded. Took the cotton out of his cheeks for the last time. "You made the right choice. Not firing me. I never considered it." "Yes, you did." Brando smiled, his real smile, not Vito's. "You should have. But you didn't. That takes something most directors don't have." He left. Didn't attend the wrap party. Didn't do press for the film's release. Just disappeared the way he always did. The Godfather opened in March 1972. Became the highest-grossing film of all time. Brando won the Oscar for Best Actor. Sent a Native American activist to refuse it on his behalf, making headlines again, being difficult again. But the performance remained. Film students study those scenes now, the way Vito moves, speaks, thinks. They don't know about the cue cards. They don't know about the memos threatening to shut down production. They don't know that the greatest performance in cinema history came from an actor who refused to memorize his lines. They just know it works. Francis kept one of the cue cards. The one from the "I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse" scene. It's in a frame in his office. Not the line itself, the card with the blocking notes, scribbled in Francis's handwriting. Let Marlon find it. That was the real genius. Not fixing Brando. Letting Brando be Brando, and building the film around what that meant. The Godfather changed cinema. But first, it changed how one young director understood that the rules exist to serve the film, not the other way around. Years later, Al Pacino admitted in an interview that working opposite Brando's cue card method had actually made him better. "I had to really listen," Pacino said. "Because I never knew exactly what Marlon would give me. He'd pause in different places every take. Emphasize different words. I couldn't plan my reactions. I had to be present. That unpredictability, the thing that terrified the studio, became the film's heartbeat. Watch the scene where Michael tells Vito about killing Sollozzo and McCluskey. Brando's responses aren't acted. They're thought. You can see Vito processing, calculating, accepting. It's 45 seconds of reaction shots that contain no dialogue and communicate everything. Gordon Willis later called it the most challenging and rewarding cinematography of his career. "Francis told me to make Brando's weakness look like power," Willis said. "So I lit him like a Rembrandt painting. You couldn't see his eyes half the time, but you felt them. That wasn't hiding an actor reading cards. That was creating myth." The cotton in the cheeks, originally just Brando's improvisation in the screen test, became iconic. Actors have imitated that bulldog jaw for 50 years. But they're imitating the surface. What they can't replicate is what happened underneath. A broken, exhausted actor staying in character for 12 weeks, reading lines fresh every single take, refusing the comfort of memorization because he understood something fundamental about Vito Corleone. Vito didn't perform power. He embodied it. And performance requires rehearsal, polish, repetition. Embodiment requires presence. Brando gave Francis presence. Francis gave Brando shadow. Together they created something that shouldn't have worked, and became the standard every film since has been measured against. The final cost of Brando's casting, $50,000 salary. 3 months of studio warfare. One director's career hanging by a thread. And a film that made $250 million, won Best Picture, and changed what cinema could be. Paramount executives who'd written those memos demanding Brando be fired? They attended the Oscars and smiled for the cameras as The Godfather swept the ceremony. Nobody mentioned the cue cards. Nobody mentioned the threats to shut down production. They just took the credit for believing in Brando all along.